FOP for being here. I have to say I was generally pleased with the Senate version of the budget because we addressed two of the larger issues for my district. One is we increased funding for our schools in the district by over $10 million, and two, the increase in the local government fund will help address the reason why we're here this morning, but it doesn't complete the job. My concern is that, as we're seeing in the city of Cleveland today, where they're having the first day of the layoffs, that the shortage of local government funding, which has been a long-term commitment for the local governments and the way that Ohio does its annual budget, or biannual budgeting, is going to impact public safety in our communities, especially our larger communities. And while I favor a jobs budget, you still have to have a safe place where people can go to work and a safe place to return home, and that we can't lose the emphasis on maintaining our safety forces. And I had an amendment which I proposed last week, which I'm reintroducing today, to the budget, which simply expands the amount of money the state of Ohio will receive from JobsOhio in the purchase of the JobsOhio liquor enterprise. And I gave you a little chart which shows the current proposal. JobsOhio would retire $700 million worth of debt and would provide $500 million to the state that would go to GRF. And my proposal is to increase that $500 million number to $800 million. So the JobsOhio would pay a total of $1.5 billion to the state for the acquisition of the Ohio Liquor Enterprise. I don't come by that number lightly. In my meetings with the governor's folks, they have, in response to a question I asked, disclosed to me that they do have some valuations of what the liquor business is worth. And that valuations range between $1.5 billion and $2.5 billion. Well, I don't want to leave equity on the table. I want to fund JobsOhio adequately, but I also want to make sure the people of Ohio get the fair shake in what they're paid for that liquor business, and particularly because we could use those extra $300 million to provide additional funding to local governments and to finish the funding of our schools. This would then alleviate the needs of cities like Cleveland to have to lay off police, and so that we could still provide to JobsOhio. At the end of the day, they project that they'd be getting $100 million a year for the 25 years of the bond. If you make the adjustment and give the state more money up front, as I suggest, because that reflects more the true value of the liquor business, JobsOhio would receive about $90 million a year for 25 years, which is still over $1.8 billion to create jobs, but we would use that additional money up front to make sure that the communities are safe where those jobs are going to be located, and more importantly, we make sure that the state of Ohio taxpayers get a fair value for the liquor business that's being sold to JobsOhio. And so that is the purpose of our gathering today. My amendment will simply increase the JobsOhio payment to the state. Instead of $1.2 billion, they'll pay $1.5 billion, which I believe, based on the information the governor's office has, reflects their lowest evaluation of the value of the liquor enterprise. I didn't use the $2.5 billion number, I'll go with the low number, but it shows the fair value for that business and provides us money for our local governments and for law enforcement, fire and safety, which I think is a good investment so that we have communities that are safe and secure for those jobs to locate to Ohio. And Jay?
Well, my name is Jay McDonald, and I'm president of the Ohio Fraternal Order of Police, and I want to thank Senator Grendell for hosting us all here today. Our position on this is real clear. Local government funds provide for the safety of local communities, and it's been a covenant between the state government and local government for 76 years. Cuts to local government funds impact local safety, and this to me seems like a logical solution. Senator Grendell would fit in well at my police department because my chief says don't come with a problem unless you have a solution. Well, here's a solution that makes sense, right? The concept is we have an asset we're going to sell. It's worth this much money. We'll sell it for this much money, and we'll use the money to fund local governments. That's a concept we can agree with wholeheartedly. If we're going to sell the liquor business, sell it for what it's worth, use the increased money to help keep our local communities safe. It's something that my 25,000 members can stand wholeheartedly behind, and that's why we're here today to stand with Senator Grendell to urge adoption of this amendment because it's just basically flat out common sense. We're going to sell an asset, sell it for what it's worth, use the money for something that's positive, and local government funds is something that's positive that we can use this money for. And we're raising that revenue without a tax increase, without a fee increase, with, you know, that affects everyday Ohioans. All we're asking is that we sell an asset for what it's worth. So that's where I stand.
And I think Jay hits the point. This is not a tax increase. This will not affect the taxpayers' wallets at all. It keeps within the governor's parameters that we solve this budget without raising taxes. But it does reflect the minimum true value for the asset that the state is selling. And we're only going to get one bite at that apple. That's at the time that the asset is sold. I support the overall concept of Jobs Ohio. I think we need to think outside the box to try to attract and keep jobs in Ohio. I hope that we'll have enough safeguards in that this money will be properly applied to that purpose. But if they're going to get $1.8 billion to Jobs Ohio at the end of the day, and we can also sell it for true value and get $300 million for local governments and schools, that's the right way of going. And all we're doing is saying sell it for its true value, apply the funds to local governments and schools to keep our community safe and our students educated so that they're here for the jobs, and then use the rest of that money, which is still over $1.8 billion, to fund the Jobs Ohio program.
Aren't you still talking about one-time money, $300 million one-time money?
It is one-time money. I mean, I'm not going to kid you on that, but the problem is it's the only time we're going to get that money. Once you sell the Jobs Ohio assets, once you sell the liquor assets to Jobs Ohio, you're not getting any money back. I mean, this is it. This is the one time to get those funds.
So this is not a long-term solution?
I'm not going to kid you. This is an immediate solution to the funding problem. Hopefully, if Jobs Ohio kicks in and creates the jobs, the tax revenues will go up, and that will be the long-term solution. But this certainly will bridge the next 2 years with respect to local government funding for police and fire, which I think is the immediate concern. But there's a bigger concern. So the concern is that we get our fair value for that liquor business, and we're only going to get that chance this year with the sale. Because once it's sold, if you look at the way this is set up, there's no coming back to it. It's sold for 25 years.
Is there any value to the long-term viability of Jobs Ohio to give them a discount of some kind?
Well, it is a discount. If you use their $2.5 billion valuation, which I think is the true valuation of the liquor business, I think it's closer to $2.5 billion, not $1.5 billion. You're giving them you're still leaving $1 billion discount on the table to Jobs Ohio. If you go with my $1.5 billion sale at $1.2 billion, which is the proposal that's currently in the budget, you're leaving a $300 million additional discount on the table. That's too much.
So why hasn't this amendment?
$300 million for 2 years, basically.
Well, instead of giving us $500 million, they give us $800 million. Plus, they pick up the $700 million worth of bonds that Jobs Ohio is going to pay off. That will be total for the sale of the liquor business, $1.5 billion. We would have the access to that money now, whether we spend it in 2 years or 5 years, how it's spent is, we would suggest that it fills part of the $417 million local government hole. With some remaining dollars, 2/3 would go there, some portion would stay for schools. But I mean, it's going to be funding for this budget. But the key is we won't get to sell that liquor business twice. We're selling it this year. You can ask the governor's office. They have an evaluation in the $2.5 billion range.
So why hasn't the Senate gone ahead and put this in the proposal to begin with? Why are you here today asking for it?
Well, I don't know why it didn't make the first cut, but we're going to take another run at it. I think there is some concern that I have heard from the folks from the Jobs Ohio side that this would reduce their annual income. If you look at their chart, they're planning on getting $100 million a year net for 25 years. That's $2.5 billion from Jobs Ohio. I suggest that by increasing this number from $500 million to $800, this number would go down to $90 million net. That's still $90 million over 25 years. Is over $1.8 billion for Jobs Ohio. Their concern is that by increasing what they pay us up front, slightly decreases how much they'll get every year because it increases the amount of the bond cost. Because they're bonding all this. They're going to raise all the money up front by bonding and to pay it off. But my point is we need that money now for local governments and for public safety. $1.8 billion is still plenty to fund Jobs Ohio over the next 25 years.
Is there also is often, isn't there, I don't know if it's a legal or a logistical agreement, but oftentimes you don't put a big bump in revenue until conference committee because of the fact that we'll get new revenue estimates at that time?
Well, I think, I made a comment before you came here. I think in my 11 years, this conference committee is going to be the real budget. I think we've had a nice exercise in the process of working through the budgetary process in the House and the Senate, but the real budget this year is going to come down to the conference committee because I think you're going to see a new projection on budget. Hopefully this is a good time to have this suggestion relooked at to add this $300 million from getting true value, or at least closer to true value from the liquor sales. But I think you're going to see the real budget coming out of the conference.
Should this be applied, this logic be applied to other privatization efforts such as the turnpike lease?
Well, absolutely. I think here, the one rule that should be applied to any time we sell a state asset is that taxpayers get maximum value, maximum true value for the asset. If the asset's worth, X, we should get at least X, not X discounted. And in this case, I will take the lowest estimate of $1.5 billion, although one can make a strong argument that the liquor business should be sold for just over $2 billion. But I'll go with the lower one on the theory that it will err on the side of caution, plus leave some additional dollars for JobsOhio to get off the ground. But still, I think that whether it's the turnpike, the lottery, the prisons, or the liquor business, the one rule ought to be that the taxpayers get the maximum value for the asset that's being sold.
Are you in favor of selling some of those others, like the lottery and the turnpike, or leasing them?
I have no objection as long as the taxpayers get, true real value from what's being sold.